In this part of our presentations, we're going to be talking about some innovation areas in the industry of high tech. I'd like to talk about innovation in two different aspects. First, from a solution perspective, in terms of capabilities we can provide to companies in the high tech industry, specifically around electronics manufacturing. I'd also like to touch briefly on innovations in delivery and how we are able to still give companies the ability to transform in terms of capability and solutions despite the coronavirus cases. So we're going to cover solutions first. We're going to talk about some challenges for electronics manufacturing and manufacturing operations management, specifically around SMT manufacturing. We're going to talk about a partnership that we have with Kojiscan, which helps us provide some fantastic capabilities in that area. And then we're going to look at that manufacturing solution specific to SMT lines. So as we said in previous presentations, electronics is at the heart of the high-tech industry. They're the basic core components and capabilities that drive the innovation across the industry. So what are some of the unique challenges around electronics manufacturing, particularly in the SMT area? So obviously there's a growing demand and a growing landscape of competitive organizations in this area. It's leading to a rise of electronics contract manufacturers. So a lot of competition between organizations in this area. SMT industry challenges specifically, unique to this, are typical of what we see: production changeover issues, machine downtime, and process optimization, some of the biggest challenges that those companies face. There's a rapid pace of transformation and changes to manufacturing, components, miniaturization, the huge explosion of variants, as we've said before. There's also a rapid pace of transformation to keep those companies competitive. So the equipment, the software installation, all have to be done extremely rapidly for companies to stay ahead of the curve. And then finally, this is the one that I think is most pertinent to our presentation today. It's really about the stringent focus on quality and security standards. And quality is key, especially for high-tech manufacturing, surface mount technology lines, dealing with moisture-sensitive devices. And in that particular area, there are stringent guidelines, JSTD 033, very challenging to implement using manual systems, and so automation is key and requires a connection of MOM to physical devices, material in the real world, all wrapped up in a solution that automates it and makes it efficient. So a lot of different challenges facing electronics manufacturers, but the one we're going to focus on, the solution that is key to what we're going to talk about, is around how do we enable all of that, how do we provide that competitive advantage, focusing on the quality and the automation of the SMT lines. First of all, it's worth thinking about why we focus on this area in terms of solution and capabilities, and that's because there's significant value and benefits in being able to automate and drive efficiency in electronics manufacturing. And these are some examples of where customers have benefited. This is an aggregate of different DELMIA customers, and some of the things that are addressed that we just spoke about in terms of challenges like increasing demand, the ability to significantly increase throughput and productivity is a significant enabler to that. In terms of quality, the ability to ramp up, the ability to do defect identification. And in terms of the pace of transformation, obviously companies are moving from make to stock to make to order, and looking at smaller batch and unique customization. And so the pace of that transformation, the ability to improve productivity significantly helps. And so there's an overall competitive advantage and ability to drive sustainable operations through reductions in cost and waste, and to have an impact on revenue and market coverage. So there is a significant amount of value to be achieved in driving automation and efficiency in this area of electronics manufacturing. So as you may have seen before, DELMIA covers a broad scope of different solutions for different aspects of operations. In terms of collaboration, all of the solutions we provide are designed to be collaborative. They're designed to bridge the gap between the virtual and the real worlds together and provide environments and applications that allow different stakeholders to collaborate on solutions. So in terms of the next layer down, in terms of model, so this is key to working in the virtual world, looking at process engineering and so on. We're going to look at some solutions later on regarding those areas. Not going to focus on that now. The optimized layer is where we bring the power of optimization engine technology to solve some of the toughest puzzles that industries have. So in high tech, forecasting, sales and operations planning, detailed production planning and scheduling, and so on. The next layer down is where our solution fits for today in terms of the perform. So this is where we turn planning into execution across all aspects of operations. And based upon the challenges we're looking at, we're going to focus on manufacturing and production specifically is where this capability, this innovation provides the most impact. And because the focus is on traceability and control of material at a very low level, at a machine level, the key is to have a connection to the outside world. So the IoT layer is a key part of this piece of the solution for electronics manufacturing. It's important to include the physical material elements into the production and manufacturing management. So this is where we're going to look at in terms of the innovation solution now. If we just spend a second to think about why that connectivity is so important and why it's something that has been a challenge for some companies to implement, I think we can summarize that in sort of three aspects. Why connectivity? Well, it's part of the philosophy of the virtual twin experience, which we provide as part of the 3D Experience platform and the DELMIA solutions. It's a key to bridging the gap between the virtual and real world. And it's more than just a connection, though. It's a closed loop synchronization of the virtual and real worlds. And so it helps us improve productivity by having confidence in knowing what's happening in real time. It allows us to get information and insight into predictive maintenance based upon machine performance, by improving quality, by analyzing patterns in equipment and material data. So it makes us smarter by tracking material and making better decisions. And this is key in high tech due to the sensitivity and nature of electronics manufacturing, especially in SMT lines. There are challenges of connecting to the physical manufacturing line, obviously, and some of those reasons are the fact there is a vast array of communication standards and semantics. There's many reasons why there isn't a single standard. There's pros and cons of each standard that has been developed. There are legacy devices and machines that can't keep up with changing standards. There's changes in network technology, and there's obviously vendors trying to dominate the space and make their standard their own. So some of the challenges are that there's been a proliferation of different protocols, semantics, and standards, which makes it very difficult to have an overall single solution. The DELMIA approach to that is obviously to have an open strategy, because we know that there's not going to be a single standard anytime soon, so that the best approach, we believe, is to have an open strategy. As we're not a vendor of hardware ourselves, as we don't have any allegiance to any specific hardware, sometimes those hardware vendors are trying to impose their own standards of connectivity. So we're agnostic to all device and hardware, and we've adopted widespread industry standards like OPC-US and MQTT. And we also work with partners to build out that capability to connect and synchronize with more machines. And for electronics manufacturing and SMT, we partnered with the best-in-class solution from Scan, and we'll talk a little bit about that now. So the MOM solution for SMT manufacturing is a combination of what we believe, obviously, is the best-in-class manufacturing operations management solution, DELMIA Aprizo, with the best-in-class machines connection applications from Scan. Scan is a leader in track, trace, and control for over 20 years. They're an expert and standard in connectivity within the electronics manufacturing industry, and they have the tools necessary for success for transforming customers' business. And they provide the connectivity that companies need to compete in this ever-growing, changing, and deeply competitive industry, as we spoke about in terms of the challenges. So we invite you to learn more about Scan in general separately, but we're going to cover now the specific solution that we bring to the table together for the electronics manufacturing industry. So here is a high-level view of the combined solution of DELMIA Aprizo and Scan. Again, the objective is the ability to leverage all the capabilities that a manufacturing operations management system like Aprizo brings to the table across the entire production assembly operations, including SMT. And this will enable us to drive compliance with regulatory requirements, with standards, by providing a directed manufacturing solution to specification, including the process, materials, user training, all the aspects of that we need to comply with. It allows us to distribute, enforce, and monitor the best practices across the entire manufacturing portfolio and drive out errors in production that result in reduced work. reduce rework, scrap, and quality issues. And it's the capability to synchronize materials and enable lean operations, maximizing our return on assets while minimizing waste. So to realize the benefits of that in high-tech SMT manufacturing, we need that connection to the real world. We need to find out what exactly is happening in terms of the material, the machines, and the process. And so we use open standards for the traditional elements of manufacturing on the left-hand side, and then we leverage Koji-Scan for the connectivity to the SMT line specifically. And in the layer at the top, the machine integrator facilitates the management and monitoring of all the production equipment at both the facility and the organizational level, supporting this standardized manufacturing process, which is so important for us to gain the efficiency and reduce cost and waste. So we're going to focus not on the left-hand side. Aprizo has been connecting to devices for a decade in terms of the ability. I think the unique part of the solution is the Koji-Scan aspect that we bring to the table. And so we're going to focus on the SMT piece and talk about how it addresses the issues specific to electronics manufacturing and specifically to moisture sensor devices and the quality related to that. So what's challenging about maintaining the quality in surface mount technology and conforming to industry standards like JST 033 for MSDs? So moisture sensor devices are obviously commonly used in the industry for many different applications. They require special handling procedures that must conform to the industry standards to prevent them from absorbing too much moisture prior to reflow. So the foremost objective of the system is to avoid processing components that have exceeded their allowable limit through the reflow process during the first and second pass, while maintaining an efficient operation, providing real-time status of materials and advanced warnings of expiration for decision making. So if you were doing this manually, there's several shortcomings. With double-sided boards having moisture-sensitive devices on the first side, there's a complexity in tracking the life of the components, which even becomes more complex when looking at double-sided boards. Since the first reflow doesn't count as a bake, the clock of exposure time continues to run after the second reflow is accomplished. So the first issue that comes to mind is, how do we assign a remaining exposure time to a specific board? The components in a reel that's been loaded, for example, all have the same remaining exposure time because they're all same moisture sensitivity level when they're removed from their moisture barrier bag. A single label speaks for all the components on the reel, but once those components have been mounted to the first side of a dual reflow board, it becomes necessary to assign a remaining exposure time for that board. And the logical way to do it is to assign to the board the remaining exposure time of the component with the least value on the assembly line at the time the board was produced. So complex enough. Ideally, we should have a remaining exposure time assigned to each individual board to facilitate tracking. It's only possible if each board possesses its own unique identifier. And the task of recording those exposure times manually for each board is just massive, and it is not practical in a high volume environment. Even if all the boards or batches of boards are identified with their expiration date and time, it's still difficult to track and queue all the boards or batches manually between the first and second pass based on expiration priorities. So there's 4 key elements that are critical to success to solving this problem. The first is being able to track, being able to uniquely identify the material that we're working with. The second is to be able to track the material in real time. The third is to be able to manage the process to ensure quality across all required operations. And the fourth is to make it easy for the operators. We have to have a system and solution that automates it to the point where we reduce the complexity for the operators and makes it easy to manage. So we're going to look at each one of these 4 steps in a little bit of detail and talk about how they specifically provide capability and benefit to the process. So this is a basic layout of what we need to perform the material identification as part of the process. There's a number of control units in use and readers to facilitate the process. We have barcode readers at the start and end of the SMT line, and a local control unit in the center with an RF antenna and touchscreen display, which is the heart of the system. The barcode readers assign the remaining exposure time to each PCB entering the assembly line in the first pass. There's 2 readers at the start and at the end, one on the top side, one underneath, so that the label of the PCB can be read whether it's facing up or down in the first or second pass. We have an overall control box interface, enables the system to stop the line if an error condition occurs. And the local control unit is networked to a central server, and that provides access to a central database and consolidates the data from every line that we have in operation. So when the PCB enters the assembly line in the first pass, the barcode reader assigns the remaining exposure time to that unique PCB. Each time a reel or tray of sensitive components is added or removed from the machinery, the operator just needs to place the tag near the antenna, and that will log the equipment material being added. The system automatically retrieves relevant information from the tag in the database. This is done, and the operator then performs a simple load or unload transaction using the touchscreen. So the system automatically keeps track of all the components loaded on the assembly line along with their location, the machine and the feeder position, and the remaining exposure time. The second set of barcode readers at the exit of the line, we use those to confirm that each board went through the process successfully. This is an additional control step in case of a line breakdown or if the boards are manually removed from the line before the process is completed. So a number of different control elements and sensors so that we can track the assembly sequence and the PCBs moving through the process, and also the moisture sensitive devices that we're loading into the process as part of the assembly. So by adding these different control elements and readers to the process, we enable this important second step of being able to capture that data and information about the components and the PCBs in real time. And this is an example of some of the information and data that's transferred between those different layers. So from top down to the equipment, we're passing down information about the bill of materials, the routing, and the critical information on the remaining exposure time. In terms of bottom up from the equipment, we're being able to capture information about tracing the material, inspection results, machine information about events and alarms perhaps, and the critical information being communicated in real time, so the board status and routing control. So the key here is to enable all these elements to talk to each other in real time, to have a real-time status of what's happening so that we can ensure quality control and track that throughout the process. So just as a quick aside, we spoke about the complexity and the challenges of connectivity based on the multiple different vendors, protocols, semantics. The DELMIA approach is to be open agnostic. Kojiscan has the same philosophy in terms of the ability to connect to a massive variety of different vendors and their machinery, in terms of machine types and connections. And so this is just a quick and partial list of the flexibility and capability that Kojiscan has to continue that same philosophy of being able to connect to almost any part of operations and machines that customers have in place. So we have our connectivity in place. We have the ability to identify our material and components that are going to be part of the assembly process. So now obviously the key part is to be able to control that and to monitor that process. And the objective here again is to guarantee that our final product and assembly, our PCBs, are free of reliability problems related to the specific moisture-induced defects on our sensitive components. So the main objective of the system is to make sure the product is built per the guidelines of JSTD 033, prevent assembling components that have exceeded their floor life, and prevent assembling boards in the second pass that already have expired components on them or that will have expired components on them by the time we're complete. And the challenge is to perform all of this while maintaining an efficient operation on the manufacturing floor. So in order to achieve this, the system uses the parameters that are configurable by the user, the first pass minimum required exposure time in hours and the last pass minimum required exposure time. And these two parameters, the first pass and the last pass remaining exposure time, define the minimum exposure time required by the system to let the production run during the first and second pass without interruption. So let's take a look at how that works in a step-by-step view. So let's take a look at the first step in the sequence that allows us to manage and control the process in sequence. So let's say a PCB enters the assembly line. So after the barcode reader reads the PCB serial number, it stops it on the conveyor before it enters the first machine, and it will stay there so that we can do some basic validation steps successfully. So the system will first verify if it has any first or second pass data for it existing. If not, it assumes it's a new serial number. The system then will verify that all the moisture sensitive component part numbers required for this particular pass are loaded in the respective pick and place machines. If they're not there, then the system provides a simple list to the operator of the component part numbers that are required to run the product but are not yet loaded. The system also provides a list of the component part numbers that are not required but currently are loaded, and alerts the operator to remove them so that we can take those parts, put them back into safe storage, and remove their exposure to moisture. At that point, the operator will load the missing reels or trays of components, remove any unused reels and trays by scanning their respective tags against the RF antenna, and perform a simple load-unload transaction. So when this is done, the system then looks at the remaining exposure time. This is the key part. So we look at the status of the remaining exposure time of all the sensitive components loaded on the assembly line, and we select the one with the least remaining exposure time. And the system compares the value to the first passed remaining exposure time, and will assign the remaining exposure time to the board if the criteria is met, and will release it for production. In that way, we're prioritizing those operations and components that have the least amount of exposure time remaining to make sure that we don't run into quality issues or perform operations that are unnecessary and end up with wasted parts. And the system will perform the proper error management and alert the operator if that condition is not met or cannot be met. So once we've passed all the validation steps, we've assigned the remaining exposure time, we've prioritized which board and how we're going to efficiently work on the boards that are available. Now we go through the first pass, and the system assigns an in-process first pass status to that board. After our board completes the first pass, the serial number is read by the barcode reader at the exit of the assembly line, and the status of that board is changed to completed first pass, and we capture some basic information about processing of the board, and we capture that and log it in our historical database, line name, date, time, remaining exposure time at exit, and so on. Now, if a first pass board goes through the assembly line for a second pass, the process control on the second pass is very similar to the first pass process, but on top of all the validations that we described previously, the system also verifies that the board successfully completed the first pass before letting it go on to the second pass processing. So during the second pass, the system also assigns an in-process second pass status to the board and update it to completed second pass when we read the board again at the exit barcode reader. And again, we capture some basic information about processing the board and log it again, the line name, and so on. So by having this process, we ensure that all the components are available, ready. It automates the tracking and alerting to ensure that expired components are identified. It releases the most time-critical work orders first, and also that PCBs that are not going to meet target exposure times aren't worked on unnecessarily. So this is some of the key aspects that enable us to get that fine-level control around the quality and the ability to work effectively and efficiently without having rework, scrap, and waste. Of course, there is one more important consideration that we have to factor in, and that is that there is always some human interaction. It's a very automated process, but not 100% automated. So in order for companies to adopt this sort of solution successfully, it has to be easy for operators to use. And so in multi-shift operations, obviously several operators are involved in the manufacturing process of any given batch of boards. You add to this the complexity of tracking moisture-sensitive devices during first and second pass, and considering all of that on top of all the other tasks the operator has to perform, it's obvious the system has to be really intuitive and easy to use to not add to the complexity of the operator tasks. So it is highly automated because of the RFID technology and the automated scanning. The operator actually has very little to do to perform a transaction, since most of the data acquisition is triggered automatically simply by presenting a tag to the antenna field by the local control unit, and so on. Most transactions are actually performed without any keyboard data entry at all, and the software is designed with built-in validation that maintains data integrity throughout the process. It also has a high level of guidance, so whenever information has to be provided to the operator about what to do next, or what to do if an error occurs requiring operator intervention, the appropriate message is clearly displayed simply and effectively in the system messages area. And then finally, it's all about management by exception. It's about making sure that the automated things happen seamlessly and we just focus on the alerts. So from the main panel in the solution, there's a watch list that provides access to real-time inventory, physical locations, remaining exposure times, and so on, the whole status of the materials in the assembly line in one place. And we can set warnings and alarms in the system. And so the watch list will display those and text messages whenever a condition is met, and triggers the appropriate action when necessary. So overall, it's an enhancement to the operator process and doesn't add to the complexity of their already busy job. So to summarize quickly and to conclude, so obviously the control of moisture sensitive components is a complex issue. It's got several implications in many critical aspects, the material flow and assembly process, especially for double-sided boards of sensitive components on the first side or both. It becomes very difficult to ensure that critical product quality and adherence to guidelines that we need without the implementation of an automated control system. And so we need a system that's easy to use, that works in real time, connects to all the machinery and materials that we have as part of the assembly process. And some of those benefits, are key and evident in the ability to provide a joint partnership solution like this for manufacturing operations management and SMT control in terms of securing lead times, getting visibility to active components, maintaining a database of all that information so we have historical information to go and track and analyze, automating the component tracking activity, and then providing a proactive way of providing alarms to prevent the work on components that are expired or will expire, and make sure we increase the quality and efficiency of the overall system. So the implementation of a system like this with these key benefits can lead to a very straightforward financial justification because of the extreme amount of savings due to improved quality, productivity, and material costs. And we believe that Dassault Systems and DELMIA and the Kojiscan partnership bring the best of the manufacturing operations management control and process control and surface mount technology control to deliver value for customers. So it's all very well and good to have innovation in terms of solutions. It's no good if you can't deploy them effectively. And so that's a challenge that we are faced with now today in our unique global circumstances. And so the second part of the innovation we'll look at is just a simple case study on how it is possible to provide efficient and effective delivery for solutions, even despite significant disruption. We always speak about the importance of business continuity, about providing sustainable operations, about the ability to continue to adapt and transform, especially in the high-tech industry, and the ability to not stagnate and just stay in place while other companies sort of move ahead. And so the normal process of selecting projects for innovation and having them delivered typically by vendors like Dassault Systems and consulting companies is challenging because of the disruption. So, for example, we have issues around labor availability, both from a delivery side and from a customer side. We have issues of worker safety, so especially when it comes to social distancing and thinking about projects which sometimes are very much sort of hands-on, and you think of significantly large meetings with consultants, vendors, partners, all in the same room together. Some of those are just now, infeasible or, potentially have safety issues related to that. And then we have simple things like travel restrictions or some, restrictions that companies have in terms of the ability to simply travel from one place to another and be available in person. And so there's all of these issues in addition to reduced budgets. I think there are some elements of delivery that can help in terms of cost when it comes to remote connecting with companies to deploy solutions. And so, these are all challenges, but I would argue, what's the risk of not moving forward or not maintaining operations or not continuing to innovate? And there are plenty of organizations, certainly that we work with in the high-tech industry, that are still charging ahead with projects and innovation. And so I think it's a mistake for companies to simply say, well, this sort of project or innovation we probably need to put on hold. I think, the advantage of the spirit of the industry is there's always ways to find solutions to challenges and to continue to innovate. And so I'd argue that it's a dangerous strategy to sort of simply put off transformation and innovation, and there are ways to get it done despite the significant obstacles we encounter today. So we're going to showcase one situation where the Dassault Systems Global Services Group was able to achieve a significant go live without compromising safety, without compromising the speed and pace of which they traditionally work. And I think in some cases actually found a few surprising benefits or silver linings to the cloud, which added to the project. So in this situation, this was a customer that creates electronic products and devices, about 14 to 15 production lines, over 200 potential users of the intended solution. The solution set itself is based around DELMIA Apriso. There were also some partners involved. And the challenges were to control production and flow of material across the assembly process, the automation of the test machines, to have a quality and audit process and outgoing stations to track quality and quantity. There was consulting for best practices on production execution and quality control. And there was a need for need to include traceability and reporting for business users. So it covered production processes, quality, warehouse operations, maintenance work, dashboards and reporting, ERP and automation interfaces included as well. So a very sort of typical broad set of typical project parameters for a very dynamic customer across a significant number of manufacturing facilities. We are all obviously living the new normal, as it's called. How we work today is very different than we did just a year ago. And the same is true for the way that we have approached or had to approach delivery of solutions. And so the before picture was typically projects like this would involve a lot of on-site meetings, face-to-face meetings where different stakeholders would assemble for project kickoff to make sure we define the scope and what we keep track of what's happening, significant amount of on-site presence. And of course the after is exactly the opposite, where there's a very limited amount of on-site presence. And there were sort of 4 areas that we found were significantly impacted by the new normal compared to how we would have approached this before. And so in the first case, where we would provide support to the shop floor, there would be an on-site lead consultant that would be available to provide that instantaneous support and be located next to the people that were actually receiving the solution, and be users and operators of the solution. In the after picture, that obviously had to move to a significant amount of support via collaboration tools. And so that would be done by chat and call groups to make sure that the same support could be provided, but in a way that didn't always have someone on site and putting themselves perhaps at risk from not being from social distancing. The second area, again, typically managed by the on-site lead consultant, was to provide visibility to what's happening on the shop floor and to see how some of the solution and the transformation was actually being received, adopted and execution. And again, this was moved to visibility of a different way, a remote way, through shop floor images and videos of the process. But again, what we found was that in both cases, even though we took the person primarily out of the on-site facility, there was effective ways to collaborate using tools and videos and images to still achieve the same effect and the same support. In the before picture, the third area, production deployment primarily done on-site, and again the after picture, all of that production deployment was done with customer support in a remote manner. And then finally, the work time, since we were normally used to being on-site with customers, most of the work would get done during that sort of work time, the work day, because that's when people are available. Actually, in the remote sense, or in the remote after picture, it sort of became less critical to work, at exact same times. And in that case, since we have resources located around the globe, it's possible and perhaps more amenable to leverage people in different time zones. And that's sometimes very effective. When you're working in parallel, you have the opportunity to work during work zones. And then when there is work to be done that's more offline, or not in parallel, but in series, you can outsource that to different regions of the world and have a sort of continuous workflow rather than sort of a start-stop approach based upon the work time. So these sort of methods and processes existed already, obviously. I mean, all of these are available, But I think what we found at Dassault Systems in the way that we were forced to use these is these actually became a way to provide some efficiency to the process and provide some benefit which we perhaps wouldn't otherwise have thought of or deployed based upon that. But we found that overall there was a way to manage each of the typical interactions that would have happened on site in a reasonably effective way, sometimes a more effective way by doing it in a remote fashion. So in terms of the summary and what we found in the results of the overall project was that it was quite feasible to complete the end-to-end implementation, starting from solution design to implementation, deployment and post-go live support, all primarily leveraging remote or distance capabilities and connection. There was some on-site presence to facilitate some interaction with the business users, but the vast majority of the process was done by resources that in most cases were sometimes not even in the same time zone, and leveraged their capability to continuously support throughout the project. The flexibility was still there to provide delivery in terms of changing business scenarios in a very tight schedule. So it was found that the delivery schedule was not needed to be compromised because of the remote nature, despite the fact that there was coordination needed with other vendors for a smooth implementation, including integrations and coordination between multiple partners. And so as an end result, the benefits the customer found was the ability to increase productivity, reduce scrap. They digitalized their entire shop floor operations across the different lines and plants that we supported. We supported high volume and mass production business models that they had, and we provided them support for planning and scheduling optimization in the future using production data. And the integration, as I said, was part of that. So many different parts to connect, but all quite capable of being supported by a remote delivery methodology. So just to draw a final conclusion from this part of the innovation delivery process, I think, based upon what we see high-tech customers doing in terms of continuing to move ahead, disruption doesn't mean stagnation. It is difficult in some cases to find the business continuity and sustainability methods to continue transforming, but it is happening and companies are finding ways to do it. The industry transformation will continue, and as I've said, in the high-tech industry more than others, this pace of transformation is continuing more rapidly than perhaps in other industries. And so the bottom line takeaway I think you should all have from this is don't wait to innovate. Don't put off a project because you think it's going to be hard or difficult. You will see that companies and vendors can quite easily find ways to innovate and to find ways to keep moving forward despite disruption. So that concludes our section on innovation from solutions and delivery. Please stay tuned for more information from the next part of our high-tech session.